You're very receptive in your new book to technologies that were formerly or currently taboo to much of the green establishment, nuclear being Exhibit A, the debate about engineered crops seems to have died down some. But can you walk us through the logic? The counter case, of course, is that you're encouraging proliferation and a form of energy that has never been cost effective and that has always been heavily subsidized, so is deeply uneconomical.
Well, what's really uneconomical is climate change. I think one of the things I'm dealing with in the book, basically speaking to my fellow environmentalists, is I'm trying to say when things get tough, think like an engineer, think pragmatically, put ideology and theory aside for the time being, identify problems, frame them in a way that can be solved, and solve the goddamn things. And then you may be free to go back to all the ideology you want. And we're seeing this playing out to a certain extent. You were noticing that in my afterword, I noticed that there is a legacy resistance among environmentalists to nuclear power. I have encountered it a fair amount. There is a legacy resistance among environmentalists to genetically modified food crops, transgenic crops. But there is not a huge new resistance to synthetic biology, which is way more radical than engineered a few genes to make a better corn ever was. And there's, I suspect, not going to be great resistance to fusion when it comes along. In fact, Danny Hillis has got the new green definition of fusion. We call it synthetic solar. Because that's what fusion is. It's exactly what's coming out of the sun, and all it is fusion. So what that suggests to me is that the movement has noticed that it overwrought itself against nuclear. There's a generational split. Many younger environmentalists are completely comfortable with nuclear. The guys who remember Chernobyl and remember all the stuff that they organized against way back when, they don't want to change that. But if something new, small modular reactors comes along, and that sort of fits in with the idea of a more distributed, resilient electricity net with the energy close to where it's being used, and maybe even combined heat and power, that looks pretty attractive. Mm-hmm. So the taboo is going away. There's a kind of a legacy effect, but it may not be as significant. And when the future moves fast, by and by, people who want to stay effective have to move fast. Hmm.
And what about the proliferation risks that come with that?
With nuclear, the greatest dismantler of nuclear weapons by far is nuclear energy, because as you may know, with this megatons to megawatts project that we've been doing quietly for a decade or so, the U.S. is buying up the Russian warheads and turning them into electricity in the United States. So 10% of our electricity comes from the bombs that were going to blow up our cities are now lighting up our cities. That's pretty interesting. We haven't even started on our own stockpile. Hmm. The other major element there that may help with deproliferation is fuel banking, which President Obama is pushing, where the various nations like United Arab Emirates and Vietnam and so on that want to get nuclear energy, and we would want them to do it because it's clean, do not want to get into the dealing with waste. They don't want to get into dealing with reprocessing. They would like to rent fuel, basically, and then give it back to some international consortium. Well, that is great if it's UN-supervised international consortium that's providing and taking away that fuel. You start to get the ability to know where all of the fissile material in the world is. And then that becomes part of the whole process that people right across the political spectrum are saying, let's go toward zero nuclear weapons in the world. And you do that partly by saying nuclear energy good, nuclear weapons bad, and use the one to defuse the other. Mm-hmm. So that looks pretty practical. It's not a short answer, but I think it's the one that we're actually moving toward.
I want to ask one more question, but be thinking of your questions in the meantime. Reading your book, especially the first part of the book, where you paint many, many grim pictures about everything that has gone wrong, is going wrong, and could go wrong, made me wonder, in your heart of hearts, are you really optimistic, or Or is that a pragmatic, ethical choice that you've chosen to be? I mean, can we really invent our way out of these messes that you so eloquently lay out?
I'm 71 years old. I've been a technology optimist since I was paying attention. So I think the paying attention has rewarded me, and I see Kevin Kelly and Peter Schwartz lighting up the same way. Every time we've been sort of groaned at for being optimistic about technology, we've been right, and whoever was groaning turned out to be wrong, with a few important exceptions. But I well remember we used to go to meetings like this. Remember the digital divide? We were all worried about how the people with money in developed countries were going to have all these digital powers, but the poor people of the world were not going to get digital. And Kevin Kelly was saying, no, the lucky poor people of the world are going to get the technology once it actually works. And we have to put up with this stuff during this whole period when it's crap, and it's very expensive. So we go through the process of getting it down the learning curve to where it's cheap and it actually works, and then the developing world grabs this stuff like it did with cell phones and runs to the horizon, and then we're trying to keep up with how they've figured out how to monetize cell phones and all the rest of it. So that kind of thing keeps happening, and that keeps us technology optimists smiling.
So based on experience, you're an optimist.
Based on experience. So maybe it's a peculiar lifetime, but that's a pretty long piece of longitudinal data. It obviously can go astray. Rome did fail. The arch was lost. Europe went without a bath for 1,000 years. The population dropped by 90% in many parts when agriculture failed. But that was just the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire is never mentioned because they went on fine for another 1,000 years.
Okay, ready for a question?
I don't believe it.
You've overcome them. That's it.
How about tweets? You got any tweets?
Oh, let's see. Let's ask the tweet meter here. Have I broken it already? I think I have.
This is there's one back there, but boy, this is way too much agreement.
Is this what preaching to the choir is like? I don't know.
We got a couple back here.
Okay, yes, please.
So Stewart, in your vision
identify yourself first, please.
Might as well stand up so everybody can see it.
Doan Farmer, Santa Fe Institute. So in your vision of the UN handing the fuel to the developing countries and then
selling the fuel to
developing countries, is your view then that all of the enrichment plants will be monitored in the first world, and if Uganda wants to build a nuclear reactor, or Uganda wants to enrich their fuel, that will all be done somewhere else? Somehow we can tell everybody else they can't do fuel enrichment? So that's one question. Second question, and this all relates to the thing of thinking like engineers. Engineers, of course, don't always agree about things. They don't always agree about the solutions. I would argue the oil spill taught us that you can't imagine infrastructure where you're going to ship oil and extract oil all over the world in all kinds of places. We have to expect there's going to be a certain rate of spills. I mean, that's what we've seen. We've had the order of 10 big spills, and I'm sure we're going to have more. And similarly, if we're shipping nuclear fuel all over, we're going to have spills. We're going to have theft. We're going to have how complex systems engineering would say that you can't stop immigration. Immigration is determined by the GDP of the United States. It's not determined by the wall. Heavy technological fixes are tricky and never work with 100% reliability. So how are we going to deal with that problem when we have 3,000 reactors in the United States alone?
Well, first you always look at the existence proof. We've had 40 years of nuclear power so far, fuel being carried hither and yon, sometimes a little bit of waste being carried hither and yon, with no big problems. And there's wonderful videos of the containers being run into by trains and no bad thing happens and so on. So one of the things I always want to put on any kind of precautionary principle type of thinking, which is what you're doing right now, which is the right thing to do, is to also start to put a sell-by date on the things that one worries about, so that if you're incredibly worried that genetically modified foods are going to poison people, and then millions of people eat the stuff for 10 years and nothing bad happens, you can say, well, that was not the issue we thought it was. So partly there's an existence proof here. The bad things, the really bad things that have happened with nuclear have happened from weapons, by us, actually. But it's interesting that the people who were on the receiving end of that killing with nuclear are one of the foremost nuclear nations in the world, Japan. They are that because they are an island nation. And like the French, they basically said no oil, no coal, no choice. And that is increasingly, in the light of climate change, what's coming along. There's also, by the way, now a new mode of thinking about if we decide we want to bury the waste, which probably we won't, but if we do want to do it, there's a deep borehole technology that the oil and gas guys are developing. Go down 3 miles into the basement rock where there's nothing but saline water, vitrify the stuff, throw it right down there at the reactor site out back of the parking lot where the dry cask storage is. And that really is a file and forget situation. But millions of years, well, millions of years is the geological time scale those places run at. So I'm less worried about lots of this stuff moving around, frankly. There will be problems. I predict they'll be less than what we are seeing with oil and oil spills and natural gas explosions. And there's been a lot of death from oil and gas and coal, and approximately no death that was unintentional except at Chernobyl from nuclear. And Chernobyl was shockingly small.
We're out of time.
Okay, great.
But thank you all.
Too bad. Now the questions go.
Now the questions come. Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot.